If you are a DIYer, if you got your locks installed by somebody else and you're currently maintaining, or if you got your locks installed by somebody else who wasn't a sister loctician and you are still going to your loctician for maintenance, this video is for you. And if you have sister locks, you're also welcome. Welcome back to our channel. I'm going to be answering the question, how do I know how regularly to maintain? And it's important because while you don't want to maintain too frequently, because that could just lead to thinning, you also do not want to do it so infrequently that it causes problems. Okay, so regardless of what method you are using, today I'm not talking about sister locks. Okay, so let's get this straight. I don't want anybody coming in the comments to tell me, that's not you. I'm not a sister loctician. I'm a loctician, but I'm not a sister loctician. Okay, I deal with every other kind of lock that isn't sister locks. Okay, so whether you want to call it tiny locks, Microlocs, traditional size locks. So if you are a DIYer, if you got your locks installed by somebody else and you're currently maintaining, or if you got your locks installed by somebody else who wasn't a sister loctician and you are still going to your loctician for maintenance, this video is for you. And if you have sister locks, you're also welcome. So before we get started with the video, if this is your first time on our channel, you're welcome. We love to have you. Feel free, if you like what you see, feel free to like and of course drop a nice comment in the comment section. And if you want to keep getting more of our content, do subscribe, hit the notification button, and we drop videos every Friday, so you can look out for those videos on the weekend. Okay, so let's get right into it. I like to emphasize here that one size does not fit all. Okay, and I think this is the major problem I have had with the sister lock model, where regardless of your hair type, regardless of your rate of hair growth, regardless, they bring you in on a very strict 4-weekly schedule. If my understanding is correct, again, feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. We're all here to learn. But they bring you in every 4 weeks on a very strict schedule, and then subsequently, I think around about the 6 or 9 month mark, they then bump you to every 6 weeks. So basically, once your locks settle, right, and begin to mature, then you can be extended to 6 weeks, but never more than 6 weeks. I think after the 6-week mark, they then begin to charge you extra or if you miss appointments, they charge you extra. That's my understanding. Like I said, I may be wrong. Don't quote me. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. But I've never gone by that. And the reason why is, quite honestly, no two heads of locks are the same. And by that I mean we are different not only in our hair type. For those of you who are familiar with the hair typing chart, okay, we're also very different in terms of our genetics, and therefore the rate at which our hair grows, one, and second, the way in which our hair grows out of the hair follicles. And I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by that. I want to be very clear that I am speaking more to the 4B and 4C haired people. So I'm talking mostly to people who are predominantly a mixture of 4B, 4C. Having said that, I know that even within my country, Nigeria, there's a very wide range. But today I want to focus more on people who are predominantly 4B, 4C. Okay? So for such people, unless you have particularly fine, baby, soft, cottony hair, okay, I tend to ask you to come back post installation 6 weeks for your first, after 6 weeks for your first maintenance visit. Now, if you are within the group who have very soft, downy, baby soft, textured hair, and I found that for such people, it's usually like the hair in the nape, at the sides and the front, and then, the periphery on the front. For such people, just because I'm a little bit more jittery about slippage and unraveling, I would usually ask such people to come back after 4 weeks, okay? But for everybody else, so if you have average density, average thickness of your strands, I would usually ask you to come back in about 6 weeks. Now, what schedule we then continue on after that first maintenance visit is largely up to 1, your rate of hair growth, and 2, the way and manner in which your hairs grow out of your scalp relative to your lock. Generally, there are 2 groups of people. There are those whose hair grow into the lock, so every single hair that is coming out of the head remains attached and growing into the parent lock. Most people I have seen, most of my clients have hair that grows away from and around the lock, okay? And which group you fall into then determines how frequently you will be asked to come in for maintenance. And I'm going to explain a bit more, okay? So usually on average, we would ask most people to come back within 4 to 6 weeks. At that first visit, what we're then going to look out for is how much growth have you managed to gain within that 4 to 6 weeks window. Ideally, we want at a minimum about 3/4 to a full inch. Most people usually have about 1/2 inch to 1 full inch of hair. Very rarely will you find people who have more than 1 inch, at least in Nigeria. I'm not saying it cannot happen, but most adults, okay, tend to have, within a 6-week window, tend to have about 1/2 inch to 1 full inch, and they have wide variations, okay? I've had clients who, after 11 weeks, yes, had still under 1 inch of hair. Still, I've had other clients who, after about 10 weeks, had only about 1/2 inch of hair. But when we talk about scheduling, right, the length of new growth is not the only thing you need to consider. Something else that is very important, like I said, is the way in which your hair grows relative to the parent lock. Now, if you're one of those favored few who, regardless of how long your new growth is or the length of your new growth, all the hairs, right, that are associated with that lock stay growing within the lock, those kind of people, you'll find that even after 10, 11 weeks, their grid lines are still clearly visible. There's no blurring. The hairs aren't, crossing the lines and, blurring out the grid lines. Those kind of people can go, 10, 11, sometimes even 12 weeks, and they'll still be fine, okay? However, there's a caveat. Having said that, you also need to keep in mind the number of locks that you have, okay? So, while on the one hand, I wouldn't worry so much about a client who had, let me say, 150 to about 250 locks going for 10, 11, 12 weeks. If their hair is growing to the lock, I might be a bit more squeamish or a little bit more jittery about people who had upwards of 350. So 350, 400, 600, going beyond 6 weeks. And the reason why is, as a general rule, the smaller your lock is, the more frequently you need to retie. So if reties are not your thing, if sitting for long periods, getting your hair maintained is not your thing, you really do want to ask yourself whether you want as many as 400 and above. So if you're one of those favored few people whose hair grows into the lock, then yes, you could get away with longer intervals of time between one maintenance session and the next. If, however, you are like my daughter her hair grows out of the lock. The problem with this is the longer the time between reties, the more hairs have the opportunity to grow out of that lock. And what that means is that the hairs that actually then remain within the lock are fewer and fewer and fewer. And so as the junction between the already locked hair and the loose hair distances itself from the scalp, that junction becomes more and more and more and more unstable, because remember that fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer. So as the distance increases, there are fewer and fewer and fewer hairs still within the lock. So the tendency that the lock has to snap is way higher. Okay? So two categories of people who really do want to stay within the 4 to 6 week window. One, those who have much smaller locks, and by much smaller I'm talking probably 350 and above. Two, those whose hairs grow away from the lock rather than into it. So it's not a one size fits all. And this is the big problem that I have with trying to squeeze everybody into one box and requiring everybody to come in 4 to 6 weeks regardless. Because if you ask somebody to come in 4 to 6 weeks regardless, and at 4 to 6 weeks they have 1/4 of an inch of growth, which, well, depending on the rotation you're doing, if it's a 4-point rotation, you probably won't be able to complete your rotation. What benefit is that really? You know, I mean, obviously it would benefit the loctician, obviously, but of what benefit really is it to your client? So yeah, those are all the things you really need to think about. On the other hand, you don't want to be the person who, you know, is retightening or retwisting their hair every 2 weeks just because, oh, you want it to be nice and tight and slay that. I always tell people, look, there's a certain aesthetic that comes with being locked. And if you're not comfortable with having, you know, some frizz, with your edges not being laid all the time, and I understand that sometimes, you know, you want to look nice and tight and all of that. But I usually say to people that rather than going ahead to retwist the entire front section of your hair, sometimes it might just be something that, you know, some edge control or some gels, you know, stick down those edges, go do what you have to do, and then, you know, as soon as you can, wash the gel out, because you don't want to keep gelling down your edges. That too can be damaging if it's something that you do habitually. So I get that. What I usually recommend to people is to, you know, you could retighten the first 2 rows and like the major grid line. So depending on the style that you want to do, if it's a style that's going to show your center part, you could do retighten either side of your center part, either way, whether it's the one that goes from front to back or from ear to ear. And then you could also do, you know, maybe like the first row or the first 2 rows in the front, and nobody will know that you have a teeny weeny afro, you know, going on under there. But I think the takeaway is this: there's no one size fits all. And the only way you can find out what schedule works for you is by trial and error. In other words, if you're put on a 6-week schedule and after 6 weeks, we find that you have more than an inch, then we might dial you down to 4 weeks. If you come in at 6 weeks and you don't even have up to half an inch, we might bump you to 8 weeks or 10 weeks, depending. So what I'm suggesting here really is kind of like a sliding scale kind of thing, a very, very individual approach and not a one size fits all. If you are still watching at this point, I want to thank you very much for staying with me, for sticking with me, and for your patience. If you haven't already, please leave a comment or a question, whatever it is you want to say, down in the comment section below. And if you are not yet subscribed, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell. We'd love to have you join the team. And until next Friday, we drop videos every Friday. Stay blessed and thank you for watching.